Welcome, attendees. Thank you for joining us for this panel presented by Folk Alliance International for Folk Unlocked. My name is Alka Sharma, and I'm the treasurer of the board of directors of Folk Alliance International and the executive director of Folk Music Ontario. To begin, we recognize the complexity and privilege of gathering online today by sharing a digital land acknowledgement written by Adrian Wong of Spiderweb Show in Ontario and adapted for this webinar. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let us take a moment to acknowledge the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not readily available in many Indigenous and marginalized communities. We invite you to join in acknowledging our shared responsibility to make good of this time and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and active allyship. I myself am grateful to join you from the land on which the FMO office is located is a traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We hope that you will share your thoughts and observations in the Folk Unlocked chat box. This panel will be available for viewing for the remainder of the conference once it has aired at its scheduled time. And now you are tuning in to Tax Time Cometh. And we are now going to start with, there are 3 points to this conversation, and we're going to start with working with a business manager, following into working with a business manager in 2021 and tax implications. So 2020 was a uniquely challenging year from a financial perspective. Some in our community received government support, grants, advances, fan-funded initiatives, and weekly streams. This discussion will focus on tips and troubleshooting for an unprecedented tax filing season, reflect on issues that are arising in different countries, and will help artists prepare for the future and a transitionary time when touring resumes. There's a lot that can be learned from 2020 in terms of decisions we make in 2021. And with that agenda in mind, I'd like to welcome our panelists who have joined us today to share their experiences as professionals working in business management and other ways helping artists and companies navigate financial decisions. So welcome Allie Antman, who is coming to us from Brooklyn, and Kevin Dalton, who is from Nashville, Liz Moller, who is from New York, and Kelly Ross, who is from Toronto. So we'll start with the first topic, which is working with a business manager. And Kelly, I'd like to ask you the first question. And if you can tell us all what a business manager does, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Business managers, they're really very, very key people that can really help keep artists very organized, and I do highly recommend them for anybody who can do so. And the reason is because not only are they there to help you grow your wealth, which is something that a lot of people aren't focused on because you're focused on your day-to-day artistry that you're doing. But there's somebody who can help make sure that you're always staying compliant. So this is making sure that your payments are always being made. So people like myself who are accountants who will give you the schedule of the different tax payments, for example, that you need to do on a regular basis. Your business manager is the one who's going to be there to help you to make sure that those payments all get made and they're getting done on time and keeping you on track in all aspects.
Sorry, I was just muted and I'm now back on. So Kevin, I'm wondering at what stage in a career do artists work with business managers?
I don't think it's a one size fits all. For me, anyone that's making any money at all or trying to, whether that's going out on the road, especially if they're taking a band or crew. It maybe someone's not ready for full service business management, meaning day to day, but anytime you're setting up a business, generating income, have expenses, it's time to speak with a business manager or someone that can help you navigate those waters even early on. And like I mentioned, setting up a company, doing that the right way. if you have any income at all, making sure you know the tax implications there. If you're going out on the road, even in a van with one other person, at least knowing what insurance requirements or potential pitfalls there might be without insurance. So there's a number of things. So to me, it's never too early. And if you can have someone that could at least consult you early on until you're ready for full service business management, meaning paying someone, I don't think it's ever too early.
Okay, well, that's good for us all to know. And in terms of working with Business Manager in 2021, Allie, how has your job changed? And like, what role are you playing advising clients, and how is your time and your staff being utilized primarily, especially during this time of COVID?
I think everybody's job has changed no matter who you are at this point. But about a year ago, 10 months ago, was the last tour that I think I've worked on with a client. And at the time, I was working on 85% touring, budgets, putting a budget versus actual together, state withholding, reduction forms, payrolls for crew and band. And because of the pandemic, I think all of us as business managers, lawyers, whomever, your job role has drastically changed. Now I work on PPP loans, EIDL loans. I've done unemployment forms, applications. And I think the scale of drastic changes is great over the course of the last year. And everyone has really tried to turn over every single rock that they can, try to find any sort of revenue. I've seen clients try to do private lessons to make money. And I think that the staff itself has all come together in a really good way, because at the end of the day, we work in an industry that's creative and we love what we do and we want to help clients get through it. So, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, and I've seen like a lot of different ways that artists have like changed up their style and everything. So it's been interesting to see that for sure. And just to ask all of you, what is the most important advice you've given your clients over this past year? And how about if we start with Liz?
Muted? Okay. So, a lot of the artists that we work with and that we speak with just really aren't making money right now. So it's just a question of survival. And we have gotten a lot of questions about how things like unemployment benefits might implicate visa applications. We work with foreign artists who are coming to the U.S., and a number of them have been more or less stranded in the U.S. during the pandemic without any income, having lost their work. And so I would say the most important advice we've given them is to take care of themselves first. First of all, the stimulus check does not implicate the new public charge rules. And in terms of maintaining visa status, there are some concerns with unemployment benefits. So we generally advise against applying for those. But we always say, take care, do what you need to do. You have to take care of yourself first. And we also have a new administration now. So, I don't know that those new public charge rules are going to be around for that much longer, although maintaining visa status is important. And we really encourage them to get the health care that they need, the public health care that they need.
Okay, anybody else want to also comment on that?
I'll answer that one.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Part of this answer is prior to this previous year. I think everyone on this panel would probably agree, important advice is when you have a cushion in good times, it's good to squirrel some away. And I usually say 12 months, if possible, of your fixed expenses. So whatever it takes you to live on. And I realize that's a lot to ask, and it takes time to do that. But the ones who did have that were able to weather the storm a little bit better. And then any relief that they did get throughout the year was just a little cushion. So that, I would say going into this next year, it's the same. It's getting by on the bare minimum. But when income starts to roll back in, it's a good time to start. This is a lesson learned for a lot of people. I think that we're living hand to mouth, and I realize that sometimes that's the only possibility. And also, as we've mentioned already, doing what you have to do to get by. And it's never something I like to recommend, but sometimes debt in this case was necessary, and it's okay. And that's something that will help them get through when things are better. And sometimes you have to take what you can get.
And Allie and Kelly, what kind of advice would you give your clients?
I think that on the business management side, working for a business management firm, the most important advice would be, do you really need to buy this? And it goes hand in hand with survival. And I think for the first time in my career, everyone has looked into necessity versus wanting something. And it's a very surreal moment. No matter where you are in your career, how much money you make, I think everybody had a reality check on spending habits for the first time in the 8 years I've been working in business management. And on the nonprofit side for women in music, I think that the most important change and advice that we've talked about is how can we connect with people virtually in general. And concerts and touring and everything is so live, literally. And being part of a nonprofit and also working in business management, it works hand in hand in the sense that how can we virtually communicate with each other and keep a consistent line of communication open to the point where we all stay engaged and, also just feel that we're in this together. So I think that saving, not spending, and trying to work virtually together has been the most important discussion I've had in the last year.
Great. And Kelly, what about yourself?
I very much agree with what everybody's been saying. It's all about adapting this year is one of the things I'm seeing. And that's where a lot of people are used to doing things live and in person. It's a matter of trying to figure out ways to do a lot of those things virtually and being able to open yourselves up to still having other income flows as well while that's still happening. So it might be looking at other ways to generate revenue that maybe aren't in the norm of what you might have normally done, as well as trying to put aside what you can, as well as looking into and educating yourself into other areas. So for example, in Canada, there's been so many programs that the government has rolled out, and the criteria and qualifications related to all the different aspects. There's so many different ones out there. It's really trying to get the knowledge in those different areas, seeing what you can apply for, and also realizing that there's some people that haven't been able to reach out on some of those programs because of some of the qualifications that have been out there, and learning from that. So as you're starting to generate income and trying to even pay yourselves, if you created a separate corporation or something for yourselves, you're learning how to make sure that you're keeping your options open for various programs that could come down the pipeline later.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point. Very good point. So people have been doing whatever it takes to survive and often aren't in a financial position to afford to consider tax implications as we move into the next topic of this discussion. and some might be in a pinch, or I'll just have to deal with that later, is often like what artists think. And so I'll ask you, Kevin, first. What are the ways artists and arts organizations are earning revenue in this time, and what are the tax implications of those solutions? And I'll ask everybody that question, but let's start with Kevin first.
There's a lot of different revenue streams. Some of them are the same as before, royalties, et cetera. I think the biggest change was the relief, the different grants, and then the 2 or 3 rounds of the CARES Act, including the PPP, which now is actually not considered taxable income, and if you used it appropriately and it's forgivable, you can write the expenses off as well. So it's the rare double dip. So that's really beneficial. I don't want to take the entire question if everyone's answering, but that was the most significant new source of, I guess, was all the relief packages. And there was a lot of them, including, music cares and some industry. And I'll say too, I've encouraged, it's kind of it never hurts to ask. The worst case is someone can say no. So, I've had clients ask PROs for a little advance and they've received it. And so there's a lot of creative ways to generate a revenue, or like I said, in unusual circumstances. And this past year, I've recommended going to your bank and asking for a favor there. And our partners have worked really well with us, and hopefully we can navigate some of those hurdles when we get back going. But sometimes it's feast or famine, and so you have to do that.
Yeah. And what about Liz? What about you? Like, what are the ways artists and arts organizations are earning revenue in this time, and what are the tax implications of those solutions? Oh, I think you may be on mute.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There are, for the most part, not. That's the sort of sad situation for a lot of artists and U.S. arts presenters. Again, we're working primarily with foreign artists or U.S. presenters who are presenting foreign artists. So in the past, the questions we at Tamizdat would get had to do with, should I file a central withholding agreement for my taxes? Or can I, if the artist presents this withholding certificate showing me they have the benefit of a tax treaty, do I still need to withhold? And, that was when the money that was being made was because the artists were here in the US on stage. And now, to the extent there is, I said nobody was making any money. To the extent there are some people making some money, some foreign artists who are still making money in collaboration with US arts presenters. It's often through virtual streaming. And so a lot of the questions that, from the tax perspective, that we're getting are, do we have to withhold if the entire performance is taking place outside of the United States? And that, if it's really just that performance, the answer is no. If it's a live streaming performance, it's not taking place in the US, it's not being pre-recorded and then, used again, then it's not US source income and it is not subject to US withholding tax. However, it does get complicated because some of the streaming shows are used later and involve royalties and licensing fees, and those are subject to withholding unless there's a tax treaty or something else that comes into play. So it's just a completely different kind of taxation, honestly. Like, it's a different, the US taxes royalty income and income that's made outside of the US differently than when it's happening in the US.
Okay, yeah, and I believe it's very much different in Canada too, compared to the US. And perhaps Kelly, you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, for sure. So what I'm noticing a lot is, well, first off, is the income streams are changing a little bit on what I'm seeing. So I now see a lot of people starting to offer virtual events. So there's the implications on that side, or developing courses that are now going to be getting offered in, let's say, a more e-commerce standpoint, to maybe kind of train people in the industry, mentorship programs for other people coming into the industry, or just coaching as a whole. So what I'm seeing happening with a lot of that is a lot of questions around, well, how do the taxes work now? Because now I'm doing things virtually. It's not necessarily that I'm in this location and it's very clear cut. So how does that work? And it really still comes down to, well, where are you delivering it from? Who's your audience on the other side? And what is their tax status as well? Because that can change things differently. For varying people. So for example, if you've got two people who are registered for sales tax in Canada, the implication of that is going to be different than somebody who's not, that you're selling to, even though you are. So there is a little bit of a difference on that. Now, the other side that I'm starting to see a lot of with is, a lot of people are curious about residency now this year, because that's coming into play, because people have been stuck. And the key word here is stuck. And can you prove that you've been stuck? Meaning that, what was your intent ahead of time? So did you get stuck just because you couldn't travel? There was travel restrictions. That was the only reason, and you're planning to go back, because there's differences on the way you might treat some of that. Whereas if you sold off everything and then picked up and moved even to, let's say, Europe or something, I have a client in that position right now, and then they had no idea where they were going to go. Well, it's trying to prove that intent when you go to file your taxes this year for the 2020 year, as to really where you ended up, because the tax rate can be completely different based on that.
Absolutely. And what about you, Allie? Like, is there any implications with the artists that you work with, or even for your own organization?
Yeah, I mean, for going back a step to revenue power and different revenue sources, I think on the nonprofit side, working with women in music, I've actually seen a really positive outcome in regards to donations and sponsors and corporate-based companies supporting the arts through this time, which has been really nice, because when you go through something like this at the beginning a year ago, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what money's coming in. You don't know what's going to happen with membership. And overall, I've seen a really nice amount of again, sponsors and donations come in to support the education and awareness of music. On the business management side, with artists that I work with, I've seen creative outlets of revenue, such as, like I said earlier, where some musicians are doing private lessons on Zoom and making money that way, and they're staying connected to their fans. Some artists are taking out publishing advances, potentially not taking out publishing advances, because maybe that amount of money is something that they need to defer to a different year due to tax implications. So the scale of what people are doing during this time to earn revenue is creative, and everyone is different. Every client is different. Every entity is different. It's not a one size fits all. And I think that, as long as you stay the course and you stay along with your clients and have that sense of communication, everyone should also feel that they're in it together as a team, and you'll make the best decision for you, for your client, and as a team as a whole. Everyone's human at the end of the day. Nobody's been down this road before. On the business management side, we never looked at a PPP, EIDL, and et cetera. Payroll for me a year and a half ago, when I looked back at a payroll register, is for a workers' comp audit, not how can we collect a loan through the SBA and the banks. And I think that, like Kevin said, the largest source of revenue for a lot of people are these loans. And I think it's great that we have a second round as of a couple of weeks ago. And there's a lot of details going into the PPP loans, and it takes time to read it and understand it and, fill out the applications. And I think that also on the venue side, the CARES Act has venue grants. So there are a lot of different revenue streams that we can play into here. But I think at the end of the day that 6 months from now, 12 months from now, we're going to look back. And I think that we really got through the worst of it at this point.
Mhm.
I mean, I hope so, right?
Yep.
And things are going to be different, and we're going to learn from it, and the industry will be different as a whole. And it will never be the same. And maybe it'll be better in a way. Maybe we were stuck in a certain way the last X amount of decades, and that this will actually help artists grow in a different way. And although there is a lot of streaming, it's not the equivalent of touring in regards to revenue, but I do think it keeps people engaged. But you can't be reliant on streaming income. I do think that all of these different outlets that we're looking into to try to help clients, try to help nonprofits, we will now have that skill set also moving forward. Not that a pandemic will happen again, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to learn and we're not going to get better necessarily by having new tools, right? So I think that it's all a learning curve over the last year, and we're all in this together. And like I said earlier, we're all passionate about music. And even though we're getting kicked down right now, I do think that we will get better and we will learn and we'll all come out on the other side and things will be different, but you can't take music away from people. And I think people are desperate to feel, the live entertainment again. And if you go with that mentality of that the fans are still out there and the people are still out there, then the money will come again. And right now we're just, as we keep saying, survival, which is upsetting, but I think that we just stay the course. And I personally do see the light at the end of the tunnel, but maybe that's being too positive. I don't know.
No, and I do agree. We have to remain positive, I think, in order to have the industry move forward too. And I was just going to comment on the fact that there's been so many amazing creative ideas by artists, right, that they've had to come up with because of this. And it's quite interesting to see. And I mean, even my organization, we've been lucky that we've been able to receive funding from the government. And so that's been helpful just to keep us going, because otherwise, I might have been laid off like many months ago and so this has been like super helpful in terms of what the Canadian government is doing anyways. So just moving on, Allie and Kevin, you're both in the US, presumably working with US artists. Kelly, you and I are in Canada. And Liz, you're in the US working with artists from outside the US coming to the US. So how will touring be different moving forward, do you think, given what is happening with current plans, insurance policies, etc.? And specifically, how can artists prepare for these changes from a financial perspective? And Kelly, why don't we start with you?
So what I've seen through all of this is that the industry as a whole is getting hit very, very, very hard. And one of the things that we've had to realize over this time is learning to adapt. And what does that adaptation look like? We don't really know the full picture right now. If there's one thing that I've realized over the past year is that I've learned to realize that there's so much that really is not under our control. And we have to really wait to see what the government's going to even allow us to do. So in the short term, I do think that we're going to see that there's not going to be a lot of movement geographically when it comes to the various in-person or touring going here and there. I do think that's going to be a big change we're going to see initially. But I do think there's going to be a lot more localized things happening. And I do think that once things start to open up, I really do think we're going to see a really big pickup and really huge growth, where everybody's going to be in demand a lot, because people are really going to be grasping for those opportunities that they haven't been able to have that interaction. So I do see that coming very soon. And I do think that everybody needs to take a step back and just kind of think about what's happened over the last while and how they can prepare if a situation like this were to come up again. So that's one of the things that I've got to say that I'm trying to coach people into, to make sure that they're prepared and they're ready for those different aspects, and to also think about those varying income flows that have been coming in, that they've been maybe growing upon over the last little while, and starting to continue to focus in that area on top of what they might have been doing before. So I think the potential for people in their growth and their revenue streams is going to be actually quite increased as the future goes on.
Great. And Allie?
I think that the number one thing that I think about when I think about touring is insurance. I work a lot with insurance companies in regards to all different sorts of policies you need in order to go out on the tour. And, you know, automatically over the last, 6-7 years that I've been working on tours, you basically automatically renew your touring policy. You have your broker. There might be an increase in premiums, but for the most part, you stay the course, and you have that relationship with your insurance company, and you trust them, and you trust your business manager, and you have your policy in place. At this time, the clients that I'm working on, we're not automatically renewing because we don't know when we're going back, right? So when we do go back, what are in the new, and who's writing the insurance policies now? Who are the underwriters, and how are they taking COVID into consideration at this point when there's a canceled event due to something related to COVID? How is that taken into consideration? So I've been trying to read more about insurance in like in broad detail, just to understand that more, because insurance is a huge line item, is a huge expense in touring. And I think that that's the number one thing personally that could change. Usually in a contract with you have your agent that has a 50% down, 50% balance when you get closer to the event or one day after. Our promoter is able to do 50% down, right when we start touring. Yes, I agree that in the sense that once we really are through with COVID, people will jump back in and it'll be different. But when we start to tour again, and there's been such an enormous amount of time where promoters and buyers haven't been able to book events, like, do they have that reserve? They're reliant on shows that did really well, and they know that some shows are also going to be a bust, and then they can take that money. They don't have 6 months of reserve anymore. And I think that that's a really important thing to think about on the promoter side, is how are they going to start really getting up and going again? And are they in the same position to handle the same terms with the musicians that they had before? So I think that contract terms are going to be, and deposit terms are important. At that point, there's risk also to having a show, and understanding every part of your contract. So I think the agent is going to have a different contract potentially. And I think that, again, insurance is going to be different. And you have your crew that are you going to require, vaccines? Like there's so many more conversations that we're going to start to have once we actually start to get rolling here. And we're excited to go on tour, but I think that when we get closer to it, those conversations are real conversations in order to really come back to live and do what we love to do. And because there's no risk to, an event online, or doing a streaming online, or doing a private lesson online, or making a donation. But I think we need to be very real in the sense of asking ourselves what serious changes will happen once we come back, and what risks are there. And I think that the agents are going to have a much different job in a way, and everyone will have a different job, but a very different job in the sense of how are they going to negotiate with the promoter these types of terms. And it's also a bigger discussion in the sense of just beyond the promoter and the agent. It's also, you know, the artist and all the artists, crew, and band that are moving on the tour. So all these different facets of your tour are now going to be affected, and we need to start to make some serious discussions here, having some serious discussions on how we're going to move forward safely. Because there's a lot of reliance, obviously, on the vaccine, but in a larger sense, we need to discuss the expenses that will be incurred by having a safe festival or a safe show, and so forth. So I think that I haven't had that many conversations about once we get back, right? It's all about we're coming back, or we're going to come back, right? I think those are I look forward to those discussions because I'm just excited to go to go back to the music as everybody else, to go back to being live. But, you know, we'll see what happens. And in the meantime, I think that this is a good discussion. This panel is a good discussion for that.
Absolutely. And those are all good points that you brought up. Like who assumes the financial risk of all of that, right? It's going to be quite fascinating. And I know that as you said, like people have the hope with the vaccine that things are going to be better, but it's still about people's comforts, whether they'll even come back and get together just to watch shows. But Kevin, I'm also interested in finding out from you the same question, like how will touring be different moving forward, given and what's happening with current plans?
Yeah, well, that's a real crystal ball question, isn't it? I wish I had an answer that I was certain of. I do want to add one kind of real, I guess, in real life experience here. Some of these shows that are happening or potentially happening in the near future as we transition back to normalcy. I think, you know, I don't think that insurance is going to cover COVID-related cancellations. They didn't cover it for tours that I had that were canceled, even for clients that had cancellation coverage. So I don't. That's just going to be a non-starter for insurance companies, I think. I hope I'm, surprised by that. But for shows that are coming up and that are potentially going to be canceled, as we know, I've been transparent with my artists and management, and hopefully they're doing the same, but with vendors that we work with, and hopefully they're good partners too, and they all know what's going on. But take, for example, your travel arrangements in a normal setting. You pay for the bus up front or the van, and you book your hotels, and you have your payroll set, and everything's just going along, and it's fine. Well, now those are conversations on the front end. I'm not paying anything until the day they're leaving, and that's going to be how it is. I'm protecting the artist and their money. And if we have vendors that we work with that aren't okay with that under these circumstances, then we're going to find a different vendor that is willing to work with us there, because we're all in it together. And most of them have been. And I have plenty of artists that have done live shows during this in socially distant settings. And that's how we're doing it. And some of them have canceled a few days before, and you can't pay your band or crew or your bus and your hotels weeks in advance anymore. That's just the reality. And as far as what is going to happen with touring, I have no idea. I am optimistic about it, and I think that we've, maybe have some new revenue streams. I think that possibly there's some real legs to the streaming component, the live streaming that will be combined with touring when it resumes, which will be good for artists and venues. I think that's here to stay. There's a lot to sort through with that, licensing and such, but that's a proven commodity now, and it's great. It's great for the artist. It's great exposure, and it's extra revenue. So on top of all the other optimistic outlooks that you can, I think everyone's going to be interested to go to see live shows, et cetera, but there are some different revenue streams now. So I can say that for certain.
If you wanted just to comment on like the touring aspect and how it's going to be different moving forward, given what's happening.
You're asking me?
Oh, sorry, Liz.
No.
Sorry, I'm attacking.
I was like, I thought I could do that, but maybe not.
No problem. I mean, I would say there's a lot of eagerness in terms of international artists wanting to come into the U.S., but there's also a lot of concern because visa fees can't be paid 3 days in advance. The decision to come to the U.S. has to be made, months in advance. And we do a lot of sort of legal research and policy and advocacy work, and we've been trying to work with the government on if there are ways that if somebody had a show last year and they lost all their money, all their visa fees, is there any way that we can at least lower the cost if they apply for a visa again? And it's O&P visas that we're talking about, and it's expensive. It's a few $1,000s. So yeah, that's sort of the big piece that we're trying to figure out now. Is it's a lot to kind of encourage artists to come to the U.S. and to pay all of those fees if we don't have a little more reassurance that they will be able to perform and be paid when they get here. That said, I don't know how many of you saw Dr. Fauci at APAP earlier this month, but so much of it depends on who in the U.S. gets the vaccine. But if optimistically people get the vaccine, he seemed to think that by the fall, with masks, things could be back to normal with masks and well-ventilated spaces. And he was very, again, not to be overly positive and optimistic, but it's good to have hope too. And he talked about some studies in Germany where they have had spaces that are well ventilated and they have live audiences. So and looking at the places that have been successful with that and those that haven't. And I think ventilation is going to be key at the venues in terms of who's going to be opening.
Absolutely. I would agree with that completely. And did anyone else have anything they wanted to add on that aspect? No?
I think it would be, last summer I saw a couple of drive-in concerts, right? And that was something that I've never seen before the pandemic. Drive-in, using drive-in movie theaters is now concert venues, and obviously those buyers and promoters didn't have a lot of time to put it together. So given the fact that we're now thinking of routing for and touring for fall winter 2021 is like the optimistic version of all of this. I'd be curious to see if this summer promoters and buyers are in a better position to utilize their space if they have it, because they know we're not going to be able to utilize indoor spacing. I haven't personally heard too much about more drive-ins, but I mean, maybe because we have a little bit more time and we know that we're not going to be back by the summer, that those types of venues will be utilized in a different, in the capacity that we saw last summer, but on a larger scale. I'm in New York, and like we had very few. I shouldn't say we had very few drive-ins, but I felt like I was working on, or I was part of touring in like the Midwest and the South, that I saw more drive-ins. Did you guys see any of that in Canada? Did they have that?
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
we
not
had
up on the news out there, so did you guys have that?
I was seeing some of that happen as openers. So what was happening was some bands and stuff were playing like as openers to some of the drive-in movies and stuff that they were doing it to try and bring people in, because there wasn't much as far as movies going, because there was all these holdback of releases. So I was seeing that happen a lot, as well as jumping even onto what Kevin was saying before about the streaming. I actually think what we're going to see start to happen is there's going to be live events where maybe there might be restrictions on the capacity of how many people can be there, but at the same time having the stream revenue come in as well. So it's kind of like a double whammy on that one that could be happening. But you also made really great points earlier about the whole insurance aspect and not knowing what's going to happen there. I know even though the borders were open in Canada to be able to fly, for example, what was stopping a lot of people from doing that at certain points was the fact that if you had flown, you weren't getting covered from health insurance because there was advisories there. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of affects anything as well, and as they're lifting those different aspects too.
And Liz, can you speak about what a CAW is and how non-US artists make decisions about whether they are worth doing for a tour, and if that might be different when they do start touring in the US again?
Sure. So a CWA is a central withholding agreement, and it's basically an arrangement with the IRS where if a U.S. presenter is required to withhold 30% of its payment to an artist, if the artist files a CWA, the withholding is only 10%. So it's kind of tricky. So again, as I mentioned before, if they are outside of the U.S. and they're streaming a performance and there's no royalty, no licensing, it's just a live performance, one-time thing, they're not on U.S. soil, they are not required. The payment for the services are services that are happening abroad. But royalty payments are subject to withholding. So often U.S. treaty, the artists can present a withholding certificate saying that they get the benefit of a tax treaty, because a lot of tax treaties have sections on royalties. Now, once the artists are back in the U.S., and it's not about royalties, it's really about a payment for services that are happening in the U.S., there are exceptions to the 30% withholding that are not just the CWA, but it is quite complicated. And so most venues do prefer and find it worthwhile to have the artist submit to them and file with the IRS a central withholding agreement. Now, one complication arose a couple of years ago because artists making under 10,000 it was announced that they were no longer allowed to use the CWA, and that the withholding just had to happen at 30% on this group of artists that was already not making nearly as much money. And so the IRS then put out a simplified CWA that they could use, and that Tamizdat and some other arts organizations worked with the IRS to kind of develop so that the artists making under 10,000 could also use that simplified CWA. The IRS has since withdrawn the simplified CWA and is now saying, because there were some technical glitches with it, totally on the IRS side. And so they are now saying that those artists under 10,000 can use the regular CWA. I think it kind of, in terms of whether it's worth it, I think it depends on, whether the venue who's presenting the foreign artist has an accounting department or a business manager who can kind of make sense of a withholding certificate, if that makes any sense, because U.S. venues will be considered liable for those taxes if as the withholding agent. And in the past, everybody was submitting tax forms saying that they weren't liable to withholding, and then the IRS sort of started coming down on the venues and saying these aren't valid tax forms, and that's how the CWA kind of grew up. But there are situations where if you have, an accounting or a business department at the venue who can make sense maybe of an international tax treaty or of a tax form, that technically the artist is not required. There doesn't have to be that 30% withholding, and there doesn't have to be the CWA. But all that said, it's quite complicated, and so it's usually, venues usually prefer to file that CWA or that simplified CWA and just have the withholding at 10% instead of 30% when the artist is in the U.S.
Wow. Very interesting. All right. So any final thoughts? Oh, sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you a question about that, because I know in the States, for artists that travel and tour internationally, it's a similar arrangement. We try and file for reduced withholding. And in a lot of cases, the tax amount that's still withheld after you get the reduction is it's counted as a foreign tax credit on the return here against the U.S. taxes. So I know that probably varies country to country, but maybe you could speak to that a little bit. At least it's worth people asking their accountant or their business manager for sure.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that brings to mind for me is that it's important to remember that 30% withholding that I'm sure many of you have heard about, it's not actually a tax, right? It's a withholding. It's the U.S. government taking that money for now. But if you're not making enough money as an artist to owe taxes to the U.S. government in the U.S., then you will get it back when you file your taxes in April. And that does include, using the foreign tax credits and things like that. That comes about in April. And since I'm a lawyer and not an accountant, I don't know as much about the actual tax filings that happen in April. But I know more about like the legal requirement and when you have to withhold at the point of payment. And we also talked to the IRS because I spoke to somebody at the IRS who admitted that they had been incorrectly sending directed withholding letters to venues requiring them to withhold when sometimes they didn't actually need to under the law. But again, because the tax law is so complicated, it's often the simplest, easiest way to just withhold that 30% or so that the venue doesn't feel liable, or to file the CWA rather than to try to get the advice of a tax lawyer where you can end up, or an accountant even, where it can end up being as expensive to do that. But if you have somebody in-house who can, make sense of some of the other withholding certificates, in addition to the CWA, because there are other withholding certificates that are valid, for tax treaty benefits, then I think it's worthwhile to consider those too. And that's what all the corporations do. They're not paying any of these withholding taxes.
Wow. Are there any final thoughts, since we're coming up close to the hour? Any final thoughts from any of you? Or any questions?
No, I have a final thought.
Okay.
It's kind of, we've been talking about a lot of things that maybe are a little pessimistic, and that's part of the nature of our business. But I will say it's almost never as bad as it seems, no matter what someone's situation is, especially even with a year like last year. There are options, and that's what people like us are here for. And even this question came up for a year where maybe there's income and it's just enough to get by on and you don't have your normal expenses to offset, well, the IRS, as long as you file your return and you don't pay anything, it's not ideal, right? But if you can't afford to pay your taxes, as long as you file, you're taking the right step, and they'll allow you to fall into an installment agreement and pay it over 5 years. So then a $5,000 tax liability maybe is $80 a month or whatever. So there's just a lot of things like that. So no matter what, you think your situation is, it's probably not that bad as you think. And you just need to sort through it, do your own homework, call someone that can help you counsel through it. But it's really never as bad as it seems.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Anybody else? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just, I do think touring is going to happen again, and international artists are going to come here again. And, I think this could be a good time to try to kind of get your tax house in order in terms of, because for the simplified CWA, I'm not sure for the regular CWA, but for the simplified CWA that the IRS had in effect, you had to have a social security number, an ITIN, and you had to have filed your taxes if you had any income for the prior 2 years. So to the extent, it's possible to get some of that stuff sorted, it'll be much easier to file for that CWA when you as a foreign artist come to the US. So I would just kind of, you can use it as a time to kind of get that stuff sorted.
Great idea. Allie or Kelly, any final thoughts?
I think that's a good point about the CWA is you can't apply unless you're in good standing order, and it's a good time to get in good standing order. And Kevin made a really good point too, is it's never as bad as it really seems. And like I've been saying, I think that we're in the right direction now. I think that it's a good time to have an accountant on your side, a business manager on your side to gear up for when things do come back, because fans are excited and they're still supportive of their artists. And I think everyone is sitting at home. People are looking for new music, royalties, Spotify, streaming, all that is up. We're so deprived of live that we're trying to dig in and get stimulated with the music that we do have access to, right? So, we will come back. And I do think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel for sure later this year.
Great. Thank you.
And I'll just end with stay positive. Look at what's happened this year. We've been in situations that we weren't expecting. And you know what? There's been some good in there too when you think about it. If you can really sit back and really think about some of the good areas, there's been opportunity there to look into other new streams, new revenue streams, even within your own household with people around you, new relationships, and finding new ways to connect. So try to focus on the positive of it, and just ask for help. If you need help, ask for help. Everybody's willing to lend a helping hand right now and offer the suggestions they can to help you get into the right direction. So don't be afraid to ask.
That's great. Very positive note to end the panel. So I wanted to thank you, Allie, Kevin, Liz, and Kelly. This session will continue to be available as a recording on the Folk Unlocked platform all week. So please take a moment to provide feedback about today's conversation by posting comments on the chat. And finally, Folk Unlocked is made available at a pay-what-you-can price point, thanks to the generosity of donors. If you would like to support our work, donations can be made at folk.org/donate. Stay safe and connected, and see you soon. Thanks so much.
Hey, I'm Travis Linville, singer-songwriter, instrumentalist from Tulsa, Oklahoma. There's something about Oklahoma that I feel like that keeps people rooted, whether it be Bob Wills, Woody Guthrie, or even the modern music that's come out of Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Film and Music Office has invited me to do several really cool gigs throughout the past few years. Through their, efforts of bringing films to Oklahoma, when William H. Macy's Rudderless was being filmed in Oklahoma, I went and auditioned for a part. Those things wouldn't happen if we weren't creating incentives. The Oklahoma Film and Music Office continued to provide opportunities for not only me, but musicians across Oklahoma.
Sleeping by the window, cold air creeping in, dreaming about that old song.